Chapter 1. Washington is separated into two distinct and dissimilar zones by a spine of rugged mountains, the dramatic volcanic Cascade Range. East of the high divide lie dry, undulating farmlands and expanses of near desert where the summers are hot and the winters often severe. In the lower elevations west of the Cascades, the climate is milder and considerably wetter. The soil tends to be highly acidic. There is pervasive dampness and an abundance of wildlife. In these conditions, an exposed corpse rapidly will vanish. The dominant colors of western Washington are green, blue, white, and gray. There is the green of the vast timber forests and the national parks, the blue of the lakes and the salt tower inlets scraped out eons ago by monumental glaciers. White covers many of the higher mountain peaks the year round, and the sky generally is an oppressive gray from the frequent northern Pacific weather systems that slosh ashore on the Olympic Peninsula, then are gentled as they move inland to the barrier of the Cascades. The sun does not shine too often in western Washington. Despite the chills and mists and inky mornings and evenings that in winter nearly link with one another around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Washingtonians are relentlessly outdoorsy. Practically everyone, it seems, has a boat or a camper or a ski cabin or lake property or drives one of those wheeled behemoths called RVs, recreational vehicles. Bird, deer, and bear hunting is popular in the state, so is fishing. Even Washington's urban population, clustered mainly in and around the Seattle area, where Boeing and Microsoft are major industrial presences, is robust, overwhelmingly white, and oriented toward the natural world beyond the city limits. To the native, western Washington has always been God's country, a semi-isolated temperate zone entire unto itself, where the confusion and din and extremes of the outside world had yet to intrude. It seems so safe and clean. They say it's a good place to raise a family. That is what James and Joyce Healy would have said before the 1st of February 1974. They lived in a comfortable suburb resplendent with fir trees just east of Seattle. James worked for a cash register company. Joyce was a housewife. They had 3 happy, well-adjusted children, a teenage son, Robert, and daughter, Laura, and 21-year-old Linda. Linda Healy was an accomplished singer and extrovert and her mother's favorite. She had a sweet voice, wide-set blue eyes, shoulder-length brown hair, and an even smile that conveyed poise and self-assurance. She was willowy and full of life, a senior psychology major at the University of Washington who looked forward to being a teacher. Linda enjoyed working with children. The previous autumn, she and 4 other girls had moved from their dorm rooms into a green 2-story frame house in Seattle's University District. Linda had her own basement bedroom with a window. On the other side of a thin plywood partition was another bedroom. She worked as a ski report announcer for a local radio station. To thousands of area skiers, she was the dulcet Linda, no last names were given over the air, who purred over the airwaves that Paradise Valley was open, that Crystal Mountain had 7 inches of new powder, that there would be night skiing at Alpenthal. Each morning before school, she awoke and pedaled down to the radio station on her bike. It was a short trip through the pitch-black pre-dawn of the Seattle winter. Often it was raining, and rarely would there yet be many people stirring in the University District. In very few American cities would a young woman take such risks, but Linda Healy evidently felt no fear of being alone and vulnerable in the University District, where she lived for almost 4 years. She appears not to have been aware that in early January of 1974, a young woman had been attacked very near to where she lived. Like Linda, Mary Adams, a pseudonym, had a basement bedroom in a house she shared with several other people. She had been sound asleep when a man assaulted her in her bed. He took a heavy metal rod to her head, thrashing at her repeatedly. A speculum or vaginal probe of the type commonly available from medical supply houses had been thrust brutally up inside her. A kind of bloody, frenzied examination that caused extensive internal injuries. Mary Adams survived after spending several months in a coma. She remembered nothing of the attack or her attacker. On Thursday night, January 31st, 1974, Linda Healy cooked a casserole supper for her roommates. Afterwards, she accompanied one of the girls and a young man of their mutual acquaintance for a couple of a couple hours of casual beer drinking at Dante's, a nearby college bar. She was home by 9 p.m. and in bed by 11, having set her alarm, as always, for 5:30. Perhaps an hour later, the girl who slept in the makeshift bedroom next to Linda's came downstairs and went to bed herself. This housemate, a light sleeper, heard nothing then or through the night until Linda's alarm went off in the morning and kept ringing. Then the manager of the radio station called. Where was Linda? She hadn't come to work. A quick check revealed she was nowhere in the house, yet her bicycle had not been moved. Linda's roommates were immediately apprehensive. As Friday wore on and there still was no sign of her, the cares escalated to fear. Around 4 o'clock that afternoon, Joyce Healy called the house. She and the rest of the Healy family were expected over for dinner that night. We haven't seen Linda all day, one of her frightened roommates blurted into the telephone as she burst into tears. Joyce Healy felt ice on her spine. Immediately, she told us, I knew there was something extremely wrong. I called the police right away. She and her husband Jim met the officers at Linda's house. All the girls were gathered in the living room and none of them would leave the room unaccompanied. The officers were courteous, businesslike, and plainly skeptical at the possibility of foul play. Cases such as this were more or less routine for them. Implicit in their questions was the belief that this mysterious disappearance was no mystery at all. Linda would show up at her boyfriend's or call to say she'd be right home. But Joyce Healy knew better. She quietly explained to the police that Linda wouldn't do that sort of thing, not her, Linda. Well, one of the officers told her that's the kind that do it, the ones you don't expect. Linda's basement room was inspected. A small blood stain was found on her pillow and bottom sheet. It was A positive blood, Linda's type, as was another caked red blotch discovered on her nightgown, which neatly hung in her closet. The official conclusion, Linda Healy had suffered a late-night nosebleed and had gone somewhere to have it attended to. Someone should check the local hospitals. Her red knapsack and a change of clothes were gone, suggesting that she had left the house on her own. But missing too was Linda's top bedsheet and a decorative red satin pillowcase. Also, her bed was made with distinctive hospital corners, which would have required pulling it away from the wall and then pushing it back into place. Why, the police wondered, would a young woman who rarely made her bed under any circumstances take time to do so in a medical emergency? Why remove the top sheet? Why would she take the pillowcase? Yet, what later would become the most probable theory of the case at first would have seemed ludicrous. How could someone in the dead of night enter the house, creep downstairs, overpower Linda, wrap her in a sheet, and then carry her inert 5'7", 115-pound body back up the stairs and out the door without being heard? Such a suspect would also have carefully made her bed, hung up her nightgown, selected the change of clothes, and taken her knapsack. Dismissing this possibility as far-fetched, the police did not dust the room for fingerprints or process it for telltale hair or fiber evidence or even test the semen stain found on her sheet. For the next several months, the Seattle police learned nothing more, even after they understood that this was not a middle-of-the-night nosebleed, that someone in fact had abducted Linda. It was several more months before they thought to compare the Healy disappearance with the nearby attack on Mary Adams. Certainly it was premature to advance the possibility that a homicidal night stalker who was perhaps familiar with hospitals, the distinctive bed corners, and medical supplies, the speculum, was roving in the dark through the University District, hunting. The Seattle Times and the Seattle Post-Intelligencer ran several early stories on Linda Healy's disappearance, but their coverage fell off as the police inquiry found her. Then, answers sought to Coed's disappearance greeted readers of the Times' March 29 editions. The Times' March 29th editions nearly 2 months after Linda Healy had vanished. The story reported that on March 12th, Donna Manson, 19, had disappeared 60 miles south of Seattle on the campus of Evergreen State College in Olympia, the state capital. She was last seen at about 7 p.m. as she left her dorm to attend an on-campus jazz concert. Donna Manson was a little moonstruck, a sharp contrast to the sunny and purposeful Linda Healy. She was musical like Linda. Donna played the flute. But she also dabbled in the occult, wrote syrupy poetry, and was fascinated by the medieval alchemists. School appears to have bored her, just as Western Washington's near ceaseless rains frequently depressed her. She wasn't reported missing for 5 days. Donna's acquaintances knew that a chance encounter with a new friend wasn't out of the question for her, nor would they be surprised if she decided to thumb a ride somewhere on a moment's whim. Donna had done so before. A few months earlier, she had hitchhiked south to Oregon for a few days, not bothering to tell anyone exactly where she was headed, if she knew, or how long she'd be gone. Now she was gone for good. Once notified that Donna was missing, the police considered the possibility of suicide. She was known to be moody. But when no suicide note or body was found and she did not return to campus, they concluded that Donna Manson had been kidnapped. How it had happened was anyone's guess. She had walked out into a misty, gloomy night, wrapped against the cold in her grandmother's full-length coat, a treasured possession. Her route through the heavily forested campus would have taken her down pathways, affording ample opportunities for someone to jump out and silence her. The police believe it happened otherwise. They knew that Donna Manson almost certainly was taken from the campus, probably by car. The only logical place for her abductor to have parked was behind the auditorium where the jazz concert was held. There were too many students out that night for someone not to have noticed someone carrying a lifeless body around, so Donna must have willingly accompanied her killer to his car. When it happened, either before, during, or after the concert, is unknown, and most details of what happened to Donna Manson remain a mystery as well. The Healy and Manson cases resembled one another only insofar as both victims were white college girls, and there was not a single substantive clue to either's fate. The dissimilarities were more striking. The two did not resemble one another. Linda was tall and outgoing. Donna was just 5 feet tall, weighed less than 100 pounds, and was withdrawn. The incidents occurred 60 miles apart in 2 different police jurisdictions and were separated by 40 days. One girl vanished from her bed. The second was last seen alert and afoot. Donna Manson's disappearance received even less press attention than did Linda Healy's. So far, not even the tiniest ripple of apprehension had stirred the people of Western Washington. The next attack came at Central Washington State College, CWSC, in rural Ellensburg, about 120 miles east of Seattle. Set down amidst the rolling eastern foothills of the Cascades, Ellensburg is close to ski areas and physically remote from the major population centers of Western Washington. For much of the year, it is reached from the west by road only via the formidable 3,010-foot-high Snoqualmie Pass on US 90. Just before 9 on Sunday night, April 14, 1974, 21-year-old Jane Curtis finished her work in the CWSC library and walked out the main entrance. There she encountered a shabby figure struggling with some books. He was wearing a long coat and a wool cap pulled low over his head. His left arm was in a gauze cast, no sling, and Curtis noticed his fingers were sheathed in a metal splint. The splint apparatus looked sloppily done to her, as if it had been applied with one hand or was just taped on. The young woman, nevertheless, volunteered to help the man with his books. He gratefully accepted her offer, and they set out across campus for his car. Later, Curtis was certain that the stranger could not have been taller than 5'8" or so, because she stood 5'9" in her platform shoes, and he definitely seemed shorter than she was. She further remembered to the police, he kind of looked at me sideways, kind of turned his head and looked at me funny like. His eyes seemed weird. As they neared his car, parked in the tall grass in a darkened area of the campus, he complained of the pain in his arm, which he said he had broken in a skiing accident. He said he had hit a tree. At the passenger side door, the man produced his key and asked Curtis if she'd unlock his car. Suddenly apprehensive, she refused, so he unlocked the vehicle himself. Months later, Jane Curtis would recollect under questioning that the car was a yellow Volkswagen Bug with a high-back front seat, which was black. The interior light did not go on as he opened the door, but she could see well enough to tell that the front passenger side seat was missing. Jane Curtis grew frightened. Brusquely, he ordered her into the car. What, she asked? Oh, his tone changed. Could you get in and start the car for me? With that, the young woman turned and fled. I sort of ran away, she told the police, kind of fast. 3 days later, Kathleen D'Olivo stepped out of the same library door Jane Curtis had used and was walking down the sidewalk when she heard a noise behind her. I turned around and there was this man dropping books, D'Olivo would tell investigators. He was squatting, trying to pick up the books and some packages. I noticed he had a sling on one arm and a hand brace on the other. I went over and said, "You need some help?" He said, "Yeah, could you?" The man's facial features didn't register clearly with Kathleen, who was sloppily dressed, about 6 feet tall and kind of scrawny looking. His hair was light brown, kind of shaggy. She was unsure if he wore a mustache or glasses. Something told her that he had both. Miss D'Olivo originally believed the man was headed for the library, but as she walked along with him, carrying most of his books, he turned toward a dark area where he said his car was parked. She grew suspicious, but figured she could whack him with one of his books if he tried anything. They arrived at his car, and he produced his keys. As he unlocked the passenger side door, he suddenly dropped them. After a moment of searching on his hands and knees, he stood up and asked Kathleen if she could help. His sling and hand brace, he explained, made it tough to feel around on the ground for small objects. On the way to his car, Kathleen D'Olivo made sure to keep the man in her sight in front of her. Now, standing alone with him by the vehicle, which she described to police as a shiny brown Volkswagen Bug, the young woman was about to drop her guard. I didn't want to bend over in front of him, she reported, so I said, "Let's step back and see if we can see a reflection in the lights." I squatted down, and luckily I did see the reflection, so I picked up the keys and dropped them in his hand and said goodnight. Moments later, Susan Elaine Rancourt wouldn't be so fortunate. She was a freshman biology major, a blue-eyed, blonde-haired former cheerleader and high school homecoming queen known for her wholesomeness. In her family, Susan was called Prudence Pureheart and her sensible ways. Her father had paid for a lot of dental work, and Susan protected the investment by brushing and flossing her teeth religiously. She was a sturdy girl at 5 feet, 120 pounds. Susan was more serious-minded than most CWSC students. She thought she wanted to become a doctor or maybe a research scientist, professions that would require hard work, discipline, and years of study. An A student, Rancourt had the drive and intelligence to make it, plus an engaging personal warmth and a concern for the well-being of others. The only thing that seemed to get in her way was her painful late adolescent shyness, and Susan was working on that too. The night of April 17, 1974, she had attended a meeting for prospective dorm counselors. Shortly after 10, about the time that Kathleen D'Olivo found the Volkswagen keys in the gravel and handed them back to the man in the cast, Susan left the meeting and headed back across campus toward her dormitory. She was afraid of the dark and would have been walking gingerly since she had left her contact lenses in her room. Any sudden movement or suspicious sound would have frightened her, but a cripple in need, helplessly trying to manage his books, might not have. With her mind on the counselor's meeting, the German language film she wanted to see that night, and the load of laundry she'd left in the dormitory washing machine, Susan Rancourt likely was less alert to trouble than usual. What is more, her determination not to be so shy could have led her to a bit more boldness than was her custom. She did not see the movie that night, she did not pick up her laundry, and she did not return to her dorm room. The next afternoon, her roommate reported her missing to campus security officer Bill Clayton, who notified his chief, Alfred Pickles. Pickles ordered up a campus search, issued a flyer which neglected to mention the date of the missing girl's disappearance, and called Susan's parents in Anchorage, Alaska. The search and follow-up investigation appeared to have been perfunctory. They failed to turn up Jane Curtis and Kathleen D'Olivo, who were first interviewed many months later by a Seattle detective. Overall responsibility for the case inexplicably was delegated to Alfred Pickles' secretary. The Rancourts flew down from Anchorage immediately. If it were one of my other children, I'd just say, "Stand by, they'll be back in 2 or 3 days." Dale Rancourt told the Seattle Times, but not Susan. She was always very careful. Mr. Rancourt told the reporter that his 18-year-old daughter would have packed a suitcase if she was going to go somewhere overnight, and that she would have notified somewhere where she was going to be. That was just the kind of girl she is. That is just the kind of girl she is, he explained. Any doubts the family might have had about Susan's disappearance were settled when Mrs. Rancourt looked in her daughter's dorm room medicine cabinet and found her dental floss. Never under any circumstances would this sensible girl with a mouthful of expensive dental work leave without her floss. That was just the kind of girl she was. The Rancourts, like the Healys and the Mansons before them, and many other families who would follow, endured the special agony of knowing and not knowing what had become of their child. As Joyce Healy remembered, I went kind of crazy. All the time I thought, oh my God, she's probably dead. But we cannot quit. We cannot give up. We have to try. All three families posted rewards, hired private detectives, prayed, and endured press interviews in the hopes of keeping their daughters' pictures in the paper. In this pre-America's Most Wanted era, the Rancourts tried and failed to get Susan's picture on national television. In all, the family's efforts to keep a spark of hope alive yielded little but the usual crank responses, the supposed sightings of the girls, the late-night telephone calls from heavy breathers, and the scam artists offering to return their daughters for a price. As yet, however, no one thought the three families shared a common problem. Although in each case foul play was now considered probable, and in each case there were no good suspects, these were negative links, not the sort of positive connections police are trained to notice. Later, when the links were finally made, the police discovered that the girls were being murdered at the rate of at least one victim a month. So, Linda Healy was February's murder, Manson for March, Rancourt for April. But then there was no good candidate for May. In the cynical humor of people who have seen too much, the police would call their missing victim Miss May. Her full name was Roberta Kathleen Parks. On the night of May 6, 1974, Kathy Parks left her dormitory room at Oregon State University in Corvallis, 260 miles south of Seattle, and was last seen on her way to the Student Union building. She was a stunning 21-year-old blonde who majored in religion, a sensitive girl who recovered slowly from emotional shocks. Kathy had just that week quarreled by telephone with her father, and I'm going to pause chapter 1, beginning of page 36, because my phone battery is running out and it's freezing outside. It somehow dropped like 1,000 degrees. And we'll pick up mid-chapter 1 on the next, the continuation of this chapter.